A few years ago, I had just moved into the house that I live in now. I moved in around September and this happened in December. We had just had a large amount of snow, so much so that my work, I'm a librarian, had been closed for the day. I spent the day laying around the house and generally not doing anything unless I had to. My basement is set up as my game or TV room, and it's where I spend most of my days off. I had the TV on, watching something and kind of just laying on the couch. Suddenly, I heard someone banging at the door loud. I could hear it all the way in the basement and above the sound of my surround system. They probably hit the door about 5 or 6 times. Now, I live in a pretty relaxed neighborhood, a super suburban area, and it's quiet as a mouse at night. I have friends dropping by occasionally to see my new house, and so I assumed it was one of them being a dummy and hitting the door as hard as they could to mess with me. Since it kind of annoyed me that they had been so obnoxious about it, I sat and watched some more TV, just to let whoever it was sit out there. And if it was my friend, they would call or text me. And if it was someone selling cookies or something, well, then they could screw off. Why someone would be selling cookies after a snowstorm when the roads were coated in ice, I didn't really think about it. Anyhow, I eventually decided to go up and see if maybe there was something left on the porch or it was a friend and they were waiting for me to open the door. I glanced out of the curtain, but I didn't see anyone, and so I opened up the door. No one was there and there was nothing on the porch. In the street, covered in snow and ice, mind you, was a black Cadillac with 4 people inside, slowly creeping up the street. One of them was just at that moment climbing in the back of the car as it creeped along. He heard my front door opened and he looked back at me. He just stared at me until they had moved too far up the street for me to see. I thought it was weird, but I just locked the door and went back to my day off. Later that day, it hit the news that further up my street, about a quarter mile or so, there had been a home invasion. A woman had been asleep upstairs at her house, and the 4 people that had thought that her house was empty broke in. They eventually tied her up and robbed her house at gunpoint. She finally did untie herself and went to a neighbor, who called the police and went back over with another gun to check the place out, but they were already long gone. I'm fairly certain that these 4 people were the ones that I saw outside of my house, and if I hadn't decided to go upstairs and open the door when I did, they might have thought that my house was empty and kicked in my door instead. I can still see the guy staring me in the eyes, as if he was weighing the cost of robbing the house with me in it against looking for an easier target. I guess they found one. When I was in college, my junior year, I lived in a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom dorm. This is relevant to the story. My roommate and I had roomed together before, so we were pretty good friends. Long story short, we slowly but surely stopped being so close. So, my roommate gets this boyfriend who is like 30 and doesn't go to college at all. He spends the night or whatever, but I don't care, that's her business and our room's locked. Anywho, one night our boyfriend comes over and brings some creepy friend along with him. He was polite, but I didn't want anything to do with him. I made sure to go to bed before they did, so I wasn't stuck out in the living room with him. Because he was spending a night too, and I didn't even want him to think that there was a chance in heck that he could sleep with me. Flash forward to 2 a.m. I hear a knocking at my door. My first thought was, oh heck no. I know it's that dude. So I play dead and I don't move a muscle, hoping that he would get tired of knocking and just go away and go to bed. And the knocking got louder and louder and angrier sounding. Finally, he stopped for a second, and then I hear him turning my doorknob and pushing up against my door. Now luckily, I slept with my door pad locked. Like I said, my roommate and I were not on good terms. Once he figured out that he couldn't break down the door, he just kept knocking all night long. As I laid there in fear that at any moment the door would give. Yes, I did think that maybe he had used the restroom, but he should have asked his friend or went outside. He's a man after all. Finally, morning came and he stopped. I fell asleep for maybe like an hour or so, and then my roommate and her boyfriend come knocking. I opened the door, intending to tell them about what happened last night, but they already knew. My roommate was smiling as she apologized, as if the situation was funny. The boyfriend seemed truly sorry, but the whole situation was just strange. I still to this day think that she was setting me up to get attacked or something. I was home alone one hot summer evening. My parents were out on business and I was enjoying the time alone to do whatever I wanted. Now we lived in a 2-bedroom first-floor apartment at the time. From the front entrance was a hall that opened into the kitchen, and to the left at the far end of the kitchen was my room, and to the right of the kitchen was the living room which connected to a small den. My parents' bedroom was also connected to the living room off to the right. It was around 9 p.m. when I had just finished dinner and began my nightly routine of taking out the trash, brushing my teeth and shutting down for the night. Before retreating to my room, I opened all the windows in the kitchen and living room so that the house would cool down over the night. The windows were all barred, so I wasn't too worried about any funny business happening. I'm a little bit of a security freak, so all the doors in the house have locks, including my bedroom and the bathroom. I shut off all the lights and went to my room to watch TV. At around midnight, I dozed off. I had a weird dream, or rather a nightmare of someone knocking on my door, with the knocking getting progressively louder. It was odd because in the dream, I was laying in my bed but couldn't move. The knocking got so blaringly loud until I couldn't stand it, and then I heard a scream and I woke up. My heart was racing and I was sweating a little bit, but no damage done. I looked around my room and glanced at my alarm, which read 4 a.m. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I brushed the dream off and I laid back down. I closed my eyes and suddenly heard knocking on my actual bedroom door. A little delirious, I thought I had slipped back into my nightmare. My eyes shot wide open and I sat up and stared at my door trying to listen. There were 3 slow knocks that followed. My very first thought was that my parents were back early with food or something and they wanted me to have some. My dad was notorious for knocking on my door when he got home late at night to check on me, sometimes without calling my name first. I always told him that it spooked me and he should announce himself when he knocks, but he would always forget. I got up and began walking towards the door, but something felt wrong. When my parents come home, there's usually a lot of commotion. They might be having a conversation, or I can hear their keys jingling, my mom's heels, footsteps, something. This time, though, it was dead silent. I stopped halfway to the door and called out, "Who is it?" No answer. I opened my mouth to call it again, but before I could get the first word out there were several rapid knocks on the door. Very persistent knocks, as if it was an emergency, and whoever was on the other side needed to get in now. I felt a lump in my throat. My mind was racing, and the first thing I thought of was, what if it was my dad on the other side and he's in trouble? What if he's choking and he can't speak? What if he needs my help? I was frozen in place and I couldn't move. I said, "Who is it?" once more. Again, nothing. "Please say something, please tell me who it is, it's not funny," I said. A few moments of silence went by. Suddenly, it was as if someone threw their whole weight in the door. Rapid, loud bangs began attacking the door. Kicks, punches. It was as if there were 3 people on the other side trying to break the door down. It was so loud that I started crying. I found myself jumping backwards and crawling to the corner of my room. The violent banging went on for a few more moments, and then silence. I sat in the corner frozen. My hands were covering my mouth and tears were rolling down my cheeks. I thought this was the end. I was shocked that the door still stood because when I heard the first bang, I thought the frame would come crashing down, and whatever was on the other side would instantly enter and end my life. I sat there for a brief period of time that felt like an eternity. Suddenly, I heard clinking, the sound of metal brushing past each other. I knew whatever was on the other side was going through the silverware drawer. If my life didn't end already, this was my last chance because I wouldn't get another. I sprang up and climbed onto my dresser, sitting against my window. I threw open the curtain and shoved the window down and climbed out as quietly as I could. I fell to the sidewalk and ran to the police station down the road. I was hysterical and told them what had occurred. That night, my parents were called and they did an investigation of my house. The only things out of place were a cigarette butt left at the base of my bedroom door and a butter knife on the kitchen table. In the following months, we moved out of that apartment, and thankfully, I can say that was the most excitement that I had ever been through. I soon went to college, graduated, moved to a new state with my family nearby, and life is continuing on as normal. I never know if it was a prank that night or someone was actually out to get me, but luckily, I'll never find out. About 3 years ago, I lived in a little studio apartment by myself. I had lived there for 1 year in total, and the entire time that I had lived there, someone would knock at my door about once a week, sometimes a few times a week, and occasionally multiple times in the same night. This studio apartment was in an apartment building with only 6 units. There was an old lady who lived across the street from me, a young girl about the same age living above me, and an older couple living next to her. The rest of the apartments were empty during my time there. Shortly after I had moved in, I started to get knocks on the door at around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. The first time that it happened, I was awake and watching a movie. I had gotten home really late from work and I couldn't fall asleep. I heard 3 firm knocks on the door. It was late and I'm a female and I live alone, so I definitely wasn't going to answer it. It was so loud that I was even too scared to go and look through the peephole in the door. My dog started to bark, so I shushed him and made him get into bed with me. Then we get under the covers and I'm absolutely petrified. He's still barking, but the knocking didn't continue. I texted my boyfriend about it, but he's asleep, so he doesn't reply until the next morning. He tells me that it was probably someone who had the wrong apartment, and that made sense. Weeks go by before anything else happens, but it definitely did happen again. This time, I'm asleep. It's late and I hear firm knocks on my door. My dog is barking, so I grab his collar and push him in his kennel, which is on the way to my front door. I go and look through the peephole, but there is no one standing in front of the door. Now I'm really freaked out now. I go look out the only window that I have in the whole apartment, which faces the parking lot. There are no extra cars, bikes, motorcycles, etc. I called my boyfriend because at this point, I was too scared to even go to sleep. He assures me that it must be someone who was looking for another apartment. I mean, what else could it be? Months and months pass and this happens all the time now. I had spoken with the landlord on many occasions and they assure me that it isn't them, and that it's not one of their maintenance men. I'd begged to get out of my lease, but I wasn't able to. My boyfriend never spent the night, he's Catholic, but about 10 months into my lease, his family has a big birthday party for his younger sister, and he agrees to spend the night at my apartment so that some family coming in from out of town can sleep in his bed. We stayed up late watching movies, and again, at around 2 or 3 in the morning, there is a heavy loud knock on my door. I look at my boyfriend in a kind of, "See, I told you" sort of way. He gets up and opens the front door quickly, maybe thinking that he can catch the person that's doing this, but no one's there. It's cold out that night and it's quiet, and we don't hear anyone walking around, nobody talking or getting into the car, nothing. And we get back into bed and fall asleep. Around 5 a.m., someone knocks on the door again. This time it's quieter. My boyfriend decides to call the police. We call, they come out, and they search around the vicinity of the place and said that they didn't see anyone hanging around. The next morning, as we're leaving, my neighbor, whose front door is directly across from mine, the old lady, is also leaving. She doesn't speak English, so I've never really talked to her, but my boyfriend asks her in Spanish if she has had anyone knock on her door. She tells him no and asks why he's asking. He tells her that for the last year almost, I've had someone knock on my door at least weekly. She tells us that she's sorry she didn't see or hear anything, but that she'd let us know if she does. A couple of weeks later, I let my landlord know that I would not be renewing my lease. My boyfriend asked if we could move into a new place together, and I happily agreed. A month later, the night before I moved, I was up late packing so that I could be early the next morning and be ready. My dog was already at the new place with my boyfriend, so I was all alone. There were 3 knocks and then it stopped. I flicked my porch light on through the peephole. Again, no one was there. I felt a little less scared knowing that I wouldn't be sleeping here again. But I never found out who was knocking at my door or why. To this day, it completely baffles me. I've thought of every possible reason and I have no idea why. For an entire year, someone would continuously knock on my door almost weekly. After I moved away, it stopped and it never happened again. For background and relevance to the story, I live on a private drive. It's not gated, with 3 houses on it. My house is number 3, the last house. At the time, my first neighbor had a stay-at-home mom, and she worked from home, so they were always at home. And my second is an elderly lady who was always at home as well. So you would have to walk up the drive and past the other 2 of my neighbors' houses to get to mine, the last one. Also, as our house is at an angle, when you stand at the front door face on to the left down the side of my house, you can see our back gate which enters into our back garden and our back door. So, growing up, I had a pretty disruptive childhood. Parents with a volatile relationship and alcoholic mother, etc., a messy divorce. This had quite an adverse effect on myself and I had depression since a young child, maybe 8 years old from what I can remember. When I was around 12, I left secondary school, and I proceeded to stay at home all day every day for the next 4 years, having little to no interaction with anyone, unless it was over the internet. My mother had no choice but to go to work and to leave me at home. Because we live on a private drive, the only people who knock on the door are the postman or a neighbor or a guest who we are expecting. One weekday, I was home alone as usual when I was maybe 13ish. It was the early afternoon. I had someone hammering on our front door so dramatically, it was like they were going to knock it down. As my bedroom window overlooks the front of the house, I peeked out of the window and saw that there was a woman standing there waiting for someone to answer. She was in her mid-30s maybe, with medium brown hair and carrying a bit of weight. Pretty ordinary looking if I'm honest. But I wasn't going to answer the door to this woman. I was a very anxious child, so I always had my wits about me. And my mom told me to never answer the door to anyone when she wasn't home. The knocking stopped, and I thanked God for that and that she had gone away. But the next thing I know, this woman had walked down the side of my house, opened our back gate, and started frantically banging on our back door, which is primarily glass, so it sounded awful to me at the time. I crept into my mom's bedroom, which overlooks my back garden, and this woman was just standing at the back door, frantically hitting it. Safe to say, stranger danger. I did not answer the door to her, and the woman eventually went away. Still to this day, this sits really uncomfortably with me. I never mentioned it to my mom, and I never really thought that much about it at the time other than, well, that was odd. And I think about this at least every few months as an adult. What the heck did this woman want? And why was she in such a panic, or why was she angry? Why did she bypass both my neighbors' homes and just start banging on our front door, and then run around to the back of the house and did it on the back door? I just really didn't understand it. It was creepy for me,